Hi guys, today I bring you a different shikar story of an elephant called Peer Bux who earned the name as the Terror of Hansur, written by Mervyn Smith. Mervyn Smith contributed regularly to the Calcutta newspapers, which carried a number of shikar stories round the turn of the century. Unlike many shikar writers, Mervyn Smith did not only describe his own adventures but also recounted those of others. The Terror of Hansur is one of his most dramatic stories. Peer Bux was a government elephant owned by the Madras, which is now known as Chennai Commissariat Department. At certain periods of the year, male elephants go into must. They become violent and sometimes attack their own mahots. A musk elephant, however, is very different from a rogue. This was always a point of contention amongst British shikaris, for they were reluctant to kill a very valuable and generally docile animal which occasionally went into fits of uncontrollable anger. Whether Pierre Bux was just in must or whether he had become a rogue, it was hard to tell. But he caused havoc in Hansur, destroying entire villages. It was Gordon Cumming, a shikari, who was finally called in to kill the rampaging elephant. Peer Bux was the largest elephant in the Madras Government Commissariat Department. He stood 9 feet 6 inches at the shoulder and more than 10 feet at the highest point of the convexity of the backbone. His tusks protruded 3.5 feet and were massive and solid, with a slight curve upwards and outwards. His trunk was large and massive, while the skin was soft as velvet and mottled red and white, as high class elephants should be. His pillar like forelegs were as straight as a beeline from shoulder to foot and showed muscle enough for half a dozen elephants. Physically, Pierre Bux was the beau ideal of elephantine beauty, a brute that should have fetched 15,000 rupees in the market in those times and be cheap at that price, for was he not a grander elephant to look at than many a beast that had cost its princely owner double that sum? He was quiet too, and docile, and could generally be driven by a child. Yet, with all his good qualities, with all his majestic proportions, Pierre Bux was tabooed by the natives. No Hindu would have him for a gift. He was a marked beast. His tail was bifurcated at the extremity. This signified, said those natives learned in elephant lore, that he would one day take human life. When captured in the Kedas in Michael's Valley, Coimbatore district, the European official in charge of the Kedah operations imagined the animal would bring a fancy price, but at the public sale of the captured herd, no one would give a bid for him, although his tusks alone would have fetched over 1,000 rupees for their ivory. The fatal blemish, the divided tail, was soon known to intending purchasers, and there being no bidders, he had to be retained for government use. The Commissariat Department was justly proud of Pierre Bux. He had done good service for 6 years. Did the heavy guns stick in the mud when the artillery was on its way to Bellary? Pierre Bux was sent to assist, and with a push of his massive head, he would lift the great cannon, however deep its wheels might be embedded in the unctuous black cotton soil. where heavy stores required at Markara, Peer Bux would mount the steep Ghat road and think nothing of a ton and a half load on his back. The forest department too found him invaluable in drawing heavy logs from the heart of the reserves. His register of conduct was blameless, and beyond occasional fits of temper during the must season, once a year, he was one of the most even tempered as well as one of the most useful beasts in the transport establishment. The commissariat sergeant at Hansur, who had known Pierre Bux for 2 years, would smile when allusion was made to his bifurcated tail and the native superstition regarding that malformation. Look up his register, he would say. No man killing there. Why? I would rather trust him than any other elephant, male or female, in the lines. Just you see the little boy, no higher than this, showing his walking cane, the Mahat's son, take him out to the jungles and bring him back loaded with fodder, and lambast him too, if he won't obey the little imp. He kill a man? Why, he wouldn't kill a fly. The natives know nothing. They are a superstitious lot. But a little while, and quite another story had to be told of Peer Bux. This pattern animal had gone must. Fazul, his usual mahat, which means keeper, was not there to manage him. He had gone with Sanderson to Assam, and the new keeper had struck Peer Bux when he showed temper and had been torn limb from limb by the irritated brute. Pierre Bux had broken his chains, had stampeded the Amrut Mahal cattle at Hansur, had broken into the government harness and boot factory, and done incredible damage, had gone off on the rampage on the Manantodi road, had overturned coffee carts and scattered their contents on the road, had killed several cartmen, had looted several villages, and torn down the huts. In fact, a homicidal mania seemed to have overcome him as he would steal into the cholam, that is, sorghum millet fields, and pull down the machans, that is, the bamboo platforms on which the cultivator sat watching his corn by night, and tear the poor wretch to pieces or trample him out of all shape, and it was even said that in his blind rage he would eat portions of his human victims. Natives firmly believed that elephants will occasionally take to man eating. It was a common practice when a tiger was killed for the Mahots to dip balls of jaggery in the tiger's blood and feed the elephants that took part in the drive with this mess. They say the taste of the tiger's blood gives the elephant courage to face these fierce brutes. The taste for blood thus acquired sticks to the elephant, and when he goes mad or must and takes to killing human beings, some of their blood gets into his mouth and reminds him of the sugar and blood given him at the tiger hunts, and he occasionally indulges in a mouthful of raw flesh. Was Pierre Bucks must, or was he really mad? The Mahots at Thansur, who knew him well, said he was only must. Europeans frequently speak of must elephants as mad elephants, as though the two terms were synonymous. Must, Mervyn Smith stated, was a periodical functional derangement common to all bull elephants and corresponds to the rutting season with deer and other animals. It generally occurs in the male once a year, usually in March or April, and lasts about 2 or 3 months. During this period, a dark colored mucus discharge oozes from the temples. If this discharge is carefully washed off twice a day, and the elephant given a certain amount of opium with his food and made to stand up to his middle in water for an hour every day, beyond a little uneasiness and irritability, in temper no evil consequences ensue. But should these precautions be neglected, the animal becomes savage and even furious for a time, so that it is never safe to approach him during these periods. When an elephant shows signs of must, the dark discharge at the temples is an infallible sign. He should always be securely hobbled and chained. A musk elephant, even when he breaks loose and does a lot of damage, can, if recaptured, be broken to discipline and will become as docile as ever after the must period is past. It is wholly different with a mad elephant. These brutes should be destroyed at once, as they never recover their senses. The derangement in their case being cerebral and permanent and not merely functional. This madness is frequently due to sunstroke, as elephants are by nature fitted to live under the deep shade of primeval forests. In the wild state, they feed only at night when they come out into the open. They retire at dawn into the depths of the forest so that they are never exposed to the full heat of the noonday sun. Peer Bux, being the property of the Madras government, permission was asked to destroy him, as he had done much damage to life and property in that portion of the Mysore territory lying between Hansur and the frontier of Kurg and North Wayanad. The Commissariat Department, however, regarded him as too valuable an animal to be shot, and advised that some attempt would be made to recapture him with the aid of tame elephants. Several trained elephants were sent up from Coimbatore, some more were obtained from the Mysore state, and several hunts were organized, but all attempts at his recapture entirely failed. The great length of his forelegs gave Peer Bux an enormous stretch so that he could easily outspace the fleetest shikar elephants, and when he showed fight, none of the tuskers, not even the famous Jang Bahadur, the fighting elephant of the Maharaja of M, could withstand his charge. Meanwhile, the terror he inspired stopped nearly all the traffic between Hansur and Kurg and Mysore and Manantodi. He had been at large now for nearly 2 months, and in that time he was known to have killed 14 persons, wrecked 2 villages, and done an incredible amount of damage to traffic and crops. In an evil moment for himself, he took it into his head to stampede the collector's camp on the Wainar frontier. The collector was away at Manantodi, but his tents and belongings were destroyed and one camp follower killed. Permission was now obtained to destroy him by any means, and a government reward was offered to anyone who would kill the brute. Several parties went out from Bangalore in the hope of bagging him, but never got sight of him. He was here today and 20 miles off the next day. He was never known to attack Europeans. He would lie in wait in some unfrequented part of the road and allow any suspicious looking object to pass. But when he saw a line of native carts or a small company of native travelers, he would rush out with a scream and a trumpet and overturn carts and kick them to pieces. And woe betide the unfortunate human being that fell into his clutches. He would smash them to a pulp beneath his huge feet or tear them limb from limb. Much of the above information regarding Peer Bux was gleaned at the Dak Bungalow, that is the traveller's rest house at Hansur, where a party of four, including Marvin Smith, were staying while engaged in a shooting trip along that belt of forest which forms the boundary between Mysore and British territory to the southwest. Their shoot thus far had been very unsuccessful. Beyond a few spotted deer and some game birds, they had bagged nothing. The government notification of a reward for the destruction of the rogue elephant stared them in the face at every turn they took in the long, cool veranda of the bungalow. They had not come out prepared for elephant shooting, yet there was a sufficiency of heavy metal in their armory, they thought, to try conclusions with even so formidable an antagonist as Peer Bux. Should they meet with him, disgust at the want of success hitherto of their shikar expedition, and the tantalizing effects of government notice showing that there was game very much in evidence if they cared to go after it, soon determined their movements. The native shikaris were summoned, and after much consultation, they shifted camp Karkankoti, a smaller village in the state forest of that name, and on the high road to Manantodi. The traveller's bungalow there, a second class one, was deserted by its usual native attendants, as the rogue elephant had paid two visits to that place and had pulled down a portion of the out offices in his attempts to get at the servants. In the village, they found only a family of Korambas left in charge by the Potel, that is, the village magistrate, when the inhabitants deserted it. These people, they found, had erected for themselves a machan, that is, a platform on the trees, to which they retired at night to be out of the reach of the elephant, should he came their way. From them they learned that the rogue had not been seen for a week, but that it was about his time to come that way, as he had a practice of making a complete circuit of the country lying between the frontier and the Manantodi, Mysore, and Hansur Markara roads. That was good news. So they set to work at once, getting ammunition ready for this, the largest of all game. Nothing less than 8 drams of powder and a hardened solid ball would content most of them. K, poor fellow, had been reading up Smooth Bore or some other authority on Indian game and pinned his faith to a 12-bore duck gun, for he argued at 20 paces, and that was the maximum distance from which to shoot at an elephant. The smooth bore will shoot as straight as the rifle and hit quite as hard. Their horses and pack bullocks were picketed within one of the out offices, and all the native servants took shelter inside the other. Great fires were kindled before the out offices as a precautionary measure, not that they expected the elephant that night. They were in bed betimes, as they meant to be up at daybreak and have a good hunt all around, under the guidance of the Kurambas, who promised to take them to the rogue's favorite haunts when in that neighborhood. The Dak bungalow had but two rooms, that in which O.N. himself slept had a window overlooking the out offices. In the adjacent room slept F and K. Towards the small hours of the morning, he was awakened by a loud discharge of firearms from F's room, followed by the unmistakable fierce trumpeting of an enraged elephant. There was no mistaking that sound when once heard. Catching up their rifles, they rushed into the next room and found F, gun in hand, peering out through the broken window frame, and K trying to strike a light. When F had recovered sufficiently from his excitement, he explained that he had been awakened by something trying to encircle his feet through the thick folds of the rug he had wrapped round them. On looking up, he thought he could make out the trunk of an elephant thrust through the opening where a pane of glass had been broken in the window. His loaded gun was in the corner by his side, and he fired both barrels at once. With a loud scream, the elephant withdrew its trunk, smashing the whole window at the same time. He had reloaded and was looking out for the elephant in case it should return to the attack, but could see nothing, as it was too dark. F's was a narrow escape, for had the elephant succeeded in getting his trunk around one of his legs, nothing could have saved him. With one jerk, he would have been pulled through the window, quickly done to death beneath the huge feet of the brute. The thick folds of the blanket alone saved him, and even that would have been pulled aside in a little time if he had not awakened and had the presence of mind to fire at the beast. No amount of shouting would bring any of the servants from their retreat in the out office, although they could distinctly hear them talking to each other in low tones, and it was scarcely fair of us to ask them to come out. With the probability of an infuriated rogue elephant being about. However, they soon remembered this fact, and helping themselves to whiskey pegs, as the excitement had made them thirsty, they determined to sit out the darkness as nothing could be done till morning. At the first break of day, they sallied out to learn the effects of F's shots. They could distinctly trace the huge impressions of the elephant's feet to the forest skirting the bungalow, but could find no trace of blood. The Kuramba trackers were soon on the spot, and on matters being explained to them, they said the elephant must be badly wounded about the face, otherwise, he would have renewed the attack. The shots being fired at such close quarters must have scorched the opening of the wound and prevented the immediate flow of blood. They added that, if wounded, the elephant would not go far, but would make for the nearest water in search of mud with which to plaster the wound, as mud was a sovereign remedy for all elephant wounds, and all elephants used it. The brute would lie up in some dense thicket for a day or two, as any exertion would tend to reopen the wound. The Kurambas appeared to be so thoroughly acquainted with the habits of these beasts that they readily placed themselves under their guidance, and swallowing a hasty breakfast, they set off on the trail, taking with them one shikari to interpret and a gun bearer named Suleiman to carry a tiffin basket. The tracks ran parallel with the road for about a mile and then crossed it and made south in the direction of the Kabani River, an affluent of the Kaveri. Distinct traces of blood could be seen, and presently they came to a spot covered with blood, where the elephant had evidently stood for some time. The country became more and more difficult as they approached the river. Dense clumps of bamboo and weighty thorns, with here and there a large stick or horn tree, made it difficult to see more than a few yards ahead. The Kuramba guides said that they must now advance more cautiously, as the river was within half a mile and that they might come on the rogue at any moment. Up to that moment, he didn't know if any of them appreciated the full extent of the danger they were running. Following up a wounded musk elephant on foot in dense cover, such as they were in, meant that if they did not drop the brute with the first shot, one or more of them would in all probability pay for their temerity with their lives. They had been on the tramp 2 hours, and they, all of them, more or less excited. So, taking a sip of cold tea to steady their nerves, they settled on a plan of operations. F and Mervyn Smith, having the heaviest guns, were to lead, the Kuramba trackers being a pace or two in advance of them. O and K were to follow, about 5 paces behind, and the Shikari and Suleiman were to bring up the rear at an interval of 10 paces. If they came on the elephant, the advance party were to fire first, then move aside. If the brutes survived their fire, the second battery would surely account for it. It never entered their minds that anything living could withstand a discharge at close quarters of 8 such barrels as they carried. Having settled matters to their satisfaction, off they set on the trail, moving now very cautiously, the guides enjoining the strictest silence. Every bush was carefully examined, every thicket scanned before an advance was made. Frequent stops were made, and the drops of blood carefully examined to see if they were clotted or not, as by this the Korambas could tell how far off the wounded brute was. The excitement was intense. The rustle of a falling leaf would set their hearts pit a pat. The nervous strain was too great, and he began to feel quite sick. The trail then entered a cart track through the forest, so that they could see 20 paces or so ahead. Now they were approaching the river, for they could hear the murmuring of the water some 200 or 300 yards ahead. The bamboo clumps grew thicker on either side. The leading Kuramba was just indicating that the trail led off to the right, when a terrific trumpet directly behind them made them start round, and a ghastly sight met their view. The elephant had evidently scented them long before they appeared in view, and had left cart track and, making a slight detour to the right, had gone back a little way and concealed itself behind some bamboo clumps near the track. It had quietly allowed them to pass, and then, uttering a shrill scream, charged on the rear. Seizing Suleiman in its trunk, it had lifted him aloft prior to dashing him to the ground. When they turned, Kay was standing in the path, about 10 paces from the elephant, with his gun leveled at the brute. Fire, Kay, fire! They shouted, but it was too late. Down came the trunk, and the body of poor Suleiman, hurled with terrific force, was dashed on the ground with a sickening thud, which told them he was beyond help. As the trunk was coming down, Kay fired. In a moment, the enraged brute was on him. They heard a second shot, then saw poor Kay and his gun flying through the air from a kick from the animal's forefoot. There was no time to aim. Indeed, there was nothing to aim at, as all they could see was a great black object coming down on them with incredible speed. Four shots in rapid succession, and the brute swerved to the left and went off screaming and crashing through the bamboos in its wild flight. Rapidly reloading, they waited to see if the rogue would come back, but they heard the crashing of the underwood further off and knew it had gone for good. They had now time to look around. The body of Kay they found on the top of a bamboo clump a good many yards away. They thought he was dead, as he did not reply to their calls. But on cutting down the bamboos and removing the body, they found he had only swooned. A glass of whisky soon brought him round, but he was unable to move, as his spine was injured and several ribs broken. Rigging a hammock, they had him carried into Manantodi, where he was on the doctor's hands for months before he was able to move. And finally, he had to go back to England, and he believed never thoroughly recovered his health. Suleiman's corpse had to be taken into Antarasante, and after an inquest by the native magistrate, it was made over to the poor fellow's co religionists for burial. Their tragic adventure with Peer Bux, the rogue elephant, was soon noised abroad and served only to attract a greater number of British sportsmen bent on trying conclusions with the terror of Hansur, as this notorious brute came to be called by the inhabitants of the adjacent districts. A month had elapsed since their ill fated expedition, and nothing had been heard of the rogue, although its known haunts had been scoured by some of the most noted shikaris of South India. They began to think that the wounds it had received in its encounter with them had proved fatal, and even contemplated claiming its tusks should its carcass be found and presenting them to Kay as a memento of his terrible experience with the monster. But it was a case of counting your chickens, for evidence was soon forthcoming that its tusks were not to be had for the asking. The beast had evidently been lying low while its wounds healed, and had retreated for this purpose into some of the dense fastnesses of the Begur jungles. Among others who arrived on the scene at that time to do battle with the terror were two young officers from Kannanur, one a subaltern in a native regiment, the other a naval officer on a visit to the station. They had come with letters of introduction to Colonel M, in charge of the Amrut Mahal at Hansur, and that officer had done all in his power to dissuade the youngsters from going after the rogue, as he saw plainly that they were green at shikar and did not fully comprehend the risks they would be running, nor had they experience enough to enable them to provide against possible contingencies. Finding, however, that dissuasion only strengthened their determination to brave all danger, He thought he would do the next best thing by giving them the best mount possible for such a task. Among the recent arrivals at the commissariat lines was Dot Kempa, the Great Red One, a famous tusker sent down all the way from Sikandarabad to do battle with Peer Bux. Dot Kempa was known to be staunch, as he had been frequently used for tiger shooting in the notorious Nirmal jungles and had unflinchingly stood the charge of a wounded tiger. His Mahat declared that the terror of Hansur would run at the mere sight of Dot Kempa, for had not his reputation gone forth throughout the length and breadth of India, even among the elephant folk? Kempa was not as tall as Peer Bux, but was more sturdily built, with short, massive tusks. He was mottled all over his body with red spots, hence his name, Kempa, that is red. He was a veritable bulldog among elephants and was by no means a handsome brute. But he had repeatedly done good service in bringing to order recalcitrant pachyderms, and for this reason had been singled out to try conclusions with the Hansur rogue. With such a mount, Colonel M thought the young fellows would be safe even should they met the terror. So, seeing them safely mounted on the pad, he bid them not to fail to call on thee, the forest officer on the Kurg frontier, who put them up to the best means of finding the game they were after. They had been gone about 4 days when one morning the commissariat sergeant turned up at Colonel M's bungalow and with a salute informed him that Dot Kempa was in the lines and that his mahout was drunk and incapable and he could get no information from him. The elephant and mahout had turned up sometime during the night. The pad had been left behind, and the man could give no information about the two sahibs who had gone out with him. So, guys, this is where the first part of the story ends. See you soon with the second part of the story.